Hello, everybody. Very good evening. And there may be few people who are watching in other time zones also. Greetings for them as well. So this is about a valuation session. So myself, Chinmaya, partner Guru and Jana, talking about this along with my colleague Surya Prakash. So initially, some 15-20 minutes I'll speak, and then Surya will take over for some bit. Again, myself and Surya would answer if there is any questions at the end of the event. That's how we have structured ourselves. So both myself and Surya work in valuations day in and day out. So we thought once we'll speak about valuation to all our clients, colleagues, and co-professionals. So welcome everybody in this background about valuation. So firstly, we should know what we'll be talking about today in valuation, because when we talk about valuation, everybody first thing which will come to our mind says, okay, this was some stock which I had purchased, it was so and so valued, and then it became so and so valued. As it is shown here, one person is thinking TCS is he purchased at 2,500. One more person is thinking he sold at 1,500 long ago. Somebody else thinks it should be value should be 3,000. Somebody thinks its value should be 2,000. So value would become anybody's word and anybody's value when it comes to listed company shares, just because of the reason that we keep seeing it and it's so easy to watch it. I remember one example. Very often I keep saying this. In one of my friend's house, there was one sofa set, a wooden sofa was there. That one we didn't ask him was it new, old or something, but he himself was saying that this sofa is valued 12 lakhs. So we asked him, okay, why is it valued? Is it any diamonds are there or gold is there? Or then he said no. And is it of sandalwood? Then he said no. Then why is it 12 lakhs? So he was saying, my dad bought this sofa 10 years ago by selling some 50 or something Bemel shares. So when he has sold 50 Bemel shares, we got sofa that day. Today, if he had not sold that Bemel shares, we would have earned 12 lakhs. So that is about valuation, and that is about getting confused in valuation also. So, and also when we talk about valuation, there can be many things. Recently, I was talking for 2 registered valuers under IBPI. So the concepts to be discussed there could be very different. When we are talking to PE and VC investors, the concept could be very different. When we are talking for students, the valuation aspects or concept what we discuss could be very different. So today we have a mixture of a lot of kind of audiences. We have people who are doing some bit of valuation. We have people who are learning valuation. We are people who review or receive valuation from others, CFOs and finance people of the companies who see valuation in day in and day out. They may not be doing valuation. And also there may be people who are practicing in tax or audit. They will also keep seeing valuation, but they may not do valuation. So likewise, all mixture crowd we have. So that's why we have structured our presentation in such a way that there should be key takeaways for everybody from this next 1 hour. And at the same time, we should make this session as interesting and fruitful as possible. So in this regard, first I'll lay down the context of valuation and what we will discuss in today's webinar, so that we know what exactly will come in the next 50-55 minutes. So, in fact, valuation is the basis of economy. I would say the valuation is the basis of economy, because anything and everything in economy is possible only if there is a value. If there is no value, then there is nothing called a commercial activity, and there is nothing called an economic activity, and there is no economy as such. Say if we are in the barter system, or maybe much before that, or maybe just take about some situations at home when we are talking or anything, there is no value. There is just emotions at home or between friends or anything. There is no value there. That's why there is no commerciality. But when commerciality comes, there has to be value. Otherwise, there is no sense of commerciality, because how do you measure transactions without value? So that's why valuation is the basis for any economic activity and in general for economy. Actually, we'll be using valuation many places unconsciously. For example, I go for shopping a vegetable. Say, for example, I'm buying an orange. in the street near next to my house, there is an orange. One vendor is selling at 50 rupees per kg. So my wife calls me and says that there is 2 streets away where a person is selling at 45 rupees. Why did you bring here? So that means both of us collectively valuing orange for 45 rupees, and then we decide not to buy from this 50 rupee fellow. That means we valued the orange at 45 rupees. So a similar example, buying a car. Many times we would have said this car is does not worth 9 lakhs. If that is price 9 lakhs, we say many times this is not worth 9 lakhs. Maybe we can pay some 7 or 7.5 lakhs. That's all for the features what it offers. So exactly we valued there. Though the price was 9 lakhs, we valued it as 7 lakhs or whatever. So again we valued. Also, a little different perspective when we hire, say, I'm hiring some SEA or a company secretary or anybody we are hiring, an engineer. So at that time, we do value. Okay, should we pay 6 lakhs? Should we pay 8 lakhs? Should we pay 7 lakhs? What is the fair salary? So at that time, again, we are valuing. We are valuing based on what could be the output which we may receive and based on various criteria which we look at the candidate. Take another example. We are taking an online course. If the price is 10,000, then again we are valuing the course itself. Whether is it right to pay 10,000 or should we pay little less or little more? Accordingly, we'll value and then go. Similarly, joining to school or colleges could be another example. So most times we actually will be doing valuation, but we'll be doing unconsciously. And we would know most of the concepts of valuation by ourselves or by our daily practice or our social life or from various aspects. We would have picked up valuation, but we would not consciously know. So when we discuss valuation approaches today, we'll come to know more about it. So when I'm saying we already know valuation, then what are we discussing here? So what we'll be discussing today is a systematic approaches of valuation. Though valuation is there, through common sense we can value, but still there are some universally accepted practices. Still there are some ways in which valuation, if it is done, that is understandable to everybody. If I say this car is valued 7 lakhs, I may not have the basis to prove it. How do I prove that it is 7 lakhs? How do I prove it is not 9 lakhs? So we need to see, come to a common grounding as to how everybody values generally. So we also need to do valuation in such way. So let us try to understand what exactly valuation generally understood in a common context, and with which we will be in a better position to apply our valuation. If we receive one valuation report, if we know generally about, if we attend this course today, and then we will be in a little different way, we'll look at the valuation report. So we'll know what is there, what is not there, how this concept is used, why this approach is used. We'll know a few things of that. So this is about what we'll be going to do today. So to start with, whether it is a valuation is a science or an art, this is very important to understand any concept. Before we go into what is it, we should know, okay, what is the background is it? For example, if I'm talking about say medicine practice, a doctor, it is a pure science. If I'm talking about an artist or a movie, it's a pure art. If I'm talking even an accountant, it's a pure science, because debit what comes in, credit what goes out. So it's a science. There is nothing much. Of course, there is window dressing. Of course, there is playing around the books, entries, and everything. But fundamentally, it's a science. There can't be two different answers for the same input. In case of science, similarly, in case of accounting, there can't be two different answers for the same transaction. But valuation is not like that. There can be two different valuations arrived by two different valuers. So it is like an art, but at the same time, it is science too, because nowadays valuation has progressed in such a vast and depth that more or less one common grounding is understood. Everybody around the world knows what is the best way of arriving at the value. And so there are some formulas, there are some assumptions which is generally accepted. That's why it is more or less that if two valuers are valuing with the same understanding of facts, then they should ideally come to some common grounds. So that's why it is both an art, science as well as an art. So as we have told below, it's a craft. So once we do more and more valuation, we'll become better in it, and we'll be more closer to the right approach, and will be whatever we value, that will be more closer to reality once we get more experience in valuation. So why valuation is required? Having considered all these things about what is valuation, what is the context, how do we need to look at valuation, why exactly valuation is required? Just 1 minute on this slide again to know. One is to strategy benchmarking for the industries. They should know as to what transaction that they're undertaking. Is it right, wrong, more, less? Is it fair? To know that. And then when there is an external capital funding to be raised, we need to know what is the value of our company and whether at what price we should raise and everything. Then if there is an investment decisions, when we need to make some investments, our surplus funds, even if it's an investment in a machinery, investment on some, say if we are buying a division or buying some group of people, IP, we need to know what is it valued. Valuation of IP, M&As, during M&A scenario, definitely valuation is the key aspect. When two companies are merging, each company should know value about each other. Regulatory compliances, we have a specific section about regulatory compliances today's session. So a lot of regulations require valuations, because regulatory authorities would need to know commercially there may be a way in which price may be determined, but regulators want to know whether those commercial understanding is itself factored in or any other malintention is there in doing the transaction. So they want to know whatever commercial understanding price is actually fair or not. That's why regulators want the transaction to be valued by valuers, and then they will take a call whether to accept or not. Then financial reporting, a lot of things when we report in the closing balance sheets that requires valuation. It could be shares, it could be subsidiary investments, it could be many other things which requires valuation in reporting. And in case of disputes, of course, valuation is most critical, because as long as things are all right, we'll go with what is there in books. When there is a dispute, people want to resort to a third party to know what exactly is the value in it. So now we'll move on to the core aspect of valuation. So we touched upon why valuation is required, what is the fundamental and everything. Now there are different approaches in valuation. Basically, there are fundamentally three important approaches are there. Apart from this, also there are few more approaches which we see, especially in a startup environment and everything. So Surya will take you through the fundamental approaches, how these three approaches will stand for, and what is the comparative between each of the approaches. So those things he'll take over. And then after Surya explains this, I'll come back again with a few finer aspects about these approaches and also in the Q&A session. Surya, over to you.
Thanks, Chinmay. It was very clear. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all fine and safe. Now, having understood what is valuation and why is valuation required, let us now quickly glance through what are the different approaches for valuation. See, we might keep on hearing people saying we have used book value per share or market value per share, or few people saying that we have used discounted cash flow valuation to value this entity. The basic question arises as to why there are multiple approaches for valuation. The reason for that is every asset is unique by itself. The nature of asset is very unique, such that different approaches would be required. Say, let us take an example. There is a land located in Mumbai. The approach which I choose to value that open land may be very much different than the approach which I use to value a debenture of a company. Debenture on one hand provides the investor with a free cash flow every year in the form of interest payments and principal payments. Whereas on the other hand, the land which is located in Mumbai suburbs may not provide any cash flow as such to the person holding the land. So the way I choose to value the land would be maybe comparing it with other lands located in the same area, and whatever is the market value of that land, I try to assign the same market value to this land. So that is the reason the basic nature of both the assets are itself different, such that I have to use two different approaches for valuing both the assets. And also in a similar way, the nature of each transaction and the market conditions and the transaction participants are also different. Let us consider another example. Say a company which is on the verge of liquidation, which is undergoing the insolvency proceedings, may be valued completely in a different way than a young startup which is going for fundraising. The company which is on the verge of liquidation may be valued using the net assets. I mean, the sum of the realizable value of all the assets may be considered, because it doesn't have any foreseeable future and it doesn't have any earnings capacity. Whereas on the other hand, an young startup company which is going for a fundraising may be valued not based on its asset worth, but maybe based on the earning potential. So that is the reason, depending on the circumstances in which the asset is there, depending on the transaction, depending on the nature of asset, there are multiple factors and multiple approaches will be considered for valuation. Chinmay, can we go to next slide, please? Yeah. Now let us see what are the most common generally used approaches for valuation. We have provided here 6 different approaches. The first 3 approaches are generally used for valuing young and startup companies, which may not have any revenue or which are still in the which are still in development of product and that kind of stages. Whereas the later 3 approaches are very much scientific in nature and they are dependent on lot of assumptions and basis for arriving at the value of asset. Now let us understand what is all these approaches say. The first one is a scorecard approach. Scorecard approach is generally used by angel investors and for investors who invest in very young companies. This company may not have any revenue as such, and they may not even have a product, or they may have developed a small prototype of product which is still in development stage. They may not have any capabilities of the market. So, what do angel investors do to value these companies? What is the value that at which they plan to invest in the companies? So, in order to understand that, angel investors first figure out what is the general valuation applicable in a region for these kind of companies. Say in a city like Bangalore, maybe the values, all the startups at this stage are valued at around INR 10 lakhs. Now, the angel investors try to list out few specific criteria based on which they try to value the companies. These criteria can be the promoter background. That could be one criteria. And then there could be another criteria as what stage of the company is, what stage and what is the nature of the product of the company. What is the level of technological advancement? Is there any assembled team which is there in the company which is dedicatedly working on this product? So the angel investors assign values for each of these criteria, and the target company which they are planning to value, they evaluate the company against each of these criteria. Say the target company is being the target company has a promoter who is an IIM graduate and has wide rich industry experience. He is also well known in the industry. Then maybe the target company, the promoter, may be given a 50% weightage against the 30% is given for normal companies. And also in a similar way, the product which the company is having is much more advanced product. Actually, if it goes into the market, it can revolutionize the way.
Surya, maybe little slow. If we can go, it will be much more clearer.
Sure. So, yeah. So what I was saying, the promoter background, if the promoter is a very having a very high profile and he's well known in the industry, maybe the angel investors might give a promoter 50% weightage as against 30% in the normal startup cases. And also in a similar way, the product of the company is very niche. It can actually revolutionize the way the customers and the way economy is operating currently. Then the product may be given much more weightage. So a total of all these weightages is considered. So suppose the normal weightages is 100%, and this company is valued at a 200% weight. And normally the companies and the young startups are valued at 10 lakh. This company may be valued at 20 lakhs. So that is how the investors evaluate the company and go ahead with the investment. Next is VC return based calculation. In the VC return based calculation, the return on income expectations of the investors, venture capitalist, is taken into consideration to determine what is the current valuation of the company. Let us take an example. Say there is a VC investor who is planning to invest in a company. He is expecting a 30% return over a period of 6 years. And currently, the startup companies in the market are being currently given an exit multiple of say 6 times the revenue or 10 times the revenue. And this venture capitalist investor expects that the revenue of the company could be 1 lakh by end of 6 years, and a 10 time multiple of that would be 10 lakhs. So his return expectation is 30% and is going to get an exit multiple of 10 lakh. Now the initial investment, if we cross calculate, it is going to be 33 lakhs. So that is what is the rough valuation of the company, which which is valued using under this method. I hope this is clear. And then next approach is the lump sum number based valuation. Lump sum number based valuation is generally based on the ticket sizes. Say for suppose companies which are generally receiving a Series C funding, say are valued at around 20 crores. Now this company is also planning for a Series C investment, is also going for a Series C investment. We can generally assume, since all the companies are going for 20 crore valuation, this company also might be valued at a similar number. That is the lump sum number valuation. These 3 approaches are not very scientific, though they are based on a lot of judgments of the investors and a lot of personal perceptions, the promoter's background, the technology of the product. It is all goes into this. But these are the general methods which will be used to value the startups in the market by the venture capitalists and the angel investors. And next, coming on to income approach. Income approach is a valuation which assigns the value to an asset depending on what are the future benefits that the asset is going to generate. These future benefits are discounted to the present value, and such present value is determined as the value of an asset. And then coming to the market approach. Market approach is a valuation which assigns value to a particular asset depending on how the comparable assets in the market are being valued. And the comparable value is taken for those assets and it is assigned to the current asset being valued. And cost approach. Cost approach is a valuation technique which it reflects the amount that will be required to replace the existing capacity of an asset. So that is what cost approach. Now let us understand these three approaches: income approach, market approach, and cost approach in little more detail. And before going there, now since we have discussed what are all the valuation approaches, now let us understand how to choose a valuation approach. As I've said earlier, there are multiple factors which go into in determining how to choose a valuation approach. The first one is going to be the nature of business. What is the nature of the business? Whether it is a tech company or whether it is a very traditional business model company, whether it is a retail company or it is a company which is into food processing business, which is much more stable and all. Depending on that, we'll choose what is the valuation approach that is to be followed. And also depending on the stage of company. As mentioned earlier, young and startup companies will have much more difficulties in valuation than valuing a matured companies. If it is a matured company, there will be lot of more market data available, lot more multiples available in the company, and hence it is much more easier to value, and we can also apply much more multiples and approaches for valuing the businesses. Next thing is the availability of the information and reliability of the information. Now, for young and startup companies as well as unlisted companies, the information availability can be a big challenge. In order to compare those information of this company with a particular other company, we may not have adequate data inputs. The inputs of the other companies may not be available. So these kind of challenges we valuers generally face in valuing the unlisted companies and very young startup companies. So availability of information and reliability of information should also be considered in determining what is the valuation approach. And next is, what is the purpose of valuation? If the purpose of valuation is for a regulatory requirement, then say for suppose the valuation is for income tax rule 11 UA. Rule 11 UA itself provides a specific methodology to determine the value of unquoted equity shares. In such circumstances, we have to go by the methodology which is prescribed under the regulatory purpose and then accordingly do the valuation of the or else if it is for another purpose, the income approach may be generally suitable for most of the valuations. However, all the other approaches can also be tested and then ideal approach considering all these factors has to be determined. Technically, if we see in an ideal scenario, all these approaches should give approximately same number of valuation. But as we all know, such an idealistic scenarios hardly exist anywhere on this earth, and it is very difficult, and each approach would lead to a different valuation.
Remove Surya.
Yeah, next slide.
Yeah. Also, maybe Surya, if you can hold the mouthpiece little closer, maybe it is better.
Sure.
Audibility.
Yeah. Now let us look into income approach in much more detail. As explained earlier, income approach for valuation will be used. Will determine the value of an asset based on its future cash flows. These future cash flows or benefits which are expected from an asset are discounted to present value, and the discounted present value is considered as the value of an asset. Let us consider a very simple example. Say there is a manufacturing company ABC Limited which intends to automate one of its existing process which is very much labor intensive. The annual cost that the company is incurring for this repayment of labor and other benefits is roughly around 9 or 10 lakh for a particular output level, say X. And in a similar way, a new machine is available in the market which automizes most of the process. And that machine is available for a cost of 50 lakh, and the annual maintenance cost of the machine will be 3 lakhs. Now, this machine has an expected life of 10 years. As we see, the machine is yielding a benefit of 7 lakh every year as compared to the labor cost, which is 10 lakh. And this 7 lakh over a period of 10 years will lead to a total benefit of 70 lakhs. Now let us consider this 70 lakh, if it has been discounted at a discount rate of 10%, say it is roughly coming to 55 lakh, we can simply say that the value of the machinery for the net benefit of which the company can expect out of this machinery is going to be 5 lakh, and 55 lakh is going to be the total worth of this machinery for the company. Chinmay, can you move on to next slide, please? Yeah, let us now, maybe you need to click once again. Yeah. Let us now consider, we have in the earlier case, we have discounted the value of the benefits which are going to be derived at a rate of 10%. Now the question arises, why do we need to discount the money which is going to be occurring in future, which is arising in the future? The discounting is based on the premise that premise of time value of money, and we all clearly know that the current value of the money is much more higher than the future value. Say let us take an example. We all know that the worth of a 100 rupee note in India some 10 years back was much higher than what is the worth of 100 rupee note currently in India. This is because the interest cost which a person or an investor can accumulate on a money over a period of time. This time value of money is impacted by multiple factors. One of the factor could be interest cost. The other factor could be inflation. Inflation, as we all know, it is a general rise in prices of goods and commodities in the economy over a period of time. And also, the longer the duration of the period, the higher would be the return expectation. This is because the risk involved in getting the money back, both the principal and interest, would increase over a period of time, and hence the value would be much more high. I mean, the value of money would much more decrease. Yeah. Next slide, actually. Now, having understood why to discount, let us consider what is the discount factor that we have to consider for businesses. Generally, for business, the discounting factor which is considered would be the weighted average cost of capital. Now, what does this weighted average cost of capital represent? Weighted average cost of capital is the average return that the business has to provide to sources of its finance, to the providers of its finance. Generally, for a business, there will be two kinds of providers of finance. One will be the equity shareholders. Equity shareholders invest in the company in the form of equity shares, and these people represent the real owners of the business. On the other hand, there are also the business is going to take various number of loans from banks, financial institutions, and other NBFCs and all. So these are also the providers of finance, and but they expect a fixed rate of return along with certain security on the assets of the company. Now, how do you estimate the actual return what an equity investor is estimating? We cannot go simply to all the equity investors and ask you what is your return expectation, what is your return expectation, and also generally what we do is we take the average expectation of the all the equity investors in an economy. If there is so generally the method used for valuing the cost of equity, I mean to arrive at the cost of equity, is the capital asset pricing model. The capital asset pricing model states that the return expectation of an average investor would be equal to the risk-free rate plus beta times the market risk premium. Now these three are sometimes little new terms for most of you. Now let us go just on a high level as to what are these three terms and what do these three terms indicate. Say the risk-free rate. Risk-free rate is a rate of return which is earned on an investment which is zero risk. Now, what is an investment with zero risk? An investment with zero risk is one in which there is no default risk and there is no reinvestment risk. Now, what is this default risk? Let us take an example. Let us say a company is issuing a debenture with an interest rate of 15%. This company is a debt-ridden company and its net worth is negative. Now we can invest in this company, but there is a chance that the money which we have invested, including the principal or the interest, we may not receive them in full. So there is a risk in that company. On the other hand, maybe there is a bank fixed deposit, wherein if we invest in a fixed deposit, there is a guarantee of every quarterly interest or maybe annual interest on the investment, whatever we have done. So this bank fixed deposit which we have invested is considered to be a risk-free asset. And the second condition which we have to also consider for an asset to be risk-free is whether the asset is having, whether the investment is having any reinvestment risk. Now, what is this reinvestment risk? Reinvestment risk is that, say, suppose, let us take an example. There is a debenture, there is a company which is having 10 crore in cash. This company has a requirement of, say, some project which is after 5 years. This company wants to invest this money in the market now. We invest it in a risk-free asset. Now there is a debenture which is issued by a Tata. Say Tata is assumed for now is a AAA rated company and there is no history of default for this company. Now, but the debenture is for a tenure of 3 years, whereas my project requirement is after 5 years. Now, if I suppose this can be considered as risk-free rate and I invest in Tata, for 3 years, I will be receiving regular interest payments and principal payment. But after 3 years, there is a possibility that I may not be able to find a debenture or a security which will fetch me the same return as that of Tata throughout my investment period. There could be some other security which might be giving 10% or not 12% as that of Tata, or maybe higher return or lower return also. So, in order for an asset to be investment to be considered as free, it should also have the same time horizon as that of your investment needs. So, generally for business purposes, we consider 10-year government bond yield to be the risk rate, because in local currencies government are not expected to default. And the other case, why do we use 10-year bond? It adequately covers the time horizon of the projected period, and also the 10-year bond is the most traded bond in the country. So it actually reflects what is the return expectation of the investor based on the risk-free asset. Now let us consider what is market risk premium. Market risk premium is an additional premium which an investor expects for investing in market securities than in risk-free rate. Say suppose I have an option to invest either in government bond or in market. market has a little bit of risk which the investors perceive. They maybe it will, because of the fluctuations in the economy or because of the market sentiments, market prices may go up or may go down. So there is a little risk in the investment. Now, what is the additional premium that I am charging, that I am demanding for investing in a market securities than on a risk-free rate? Say, suppose for we invest in Sensex. Sensex on an average has yielded 16% rate of return. Now, the difference between 16% and 7%, which is a risk-free rate, and the additional return which is earned on a Sensex, is the 9% return, may be considered as a market risk, additional risk premium that investor is demanding for investing in the market securities. And now we're coming to beta. What is beta? Beta represents the volatility of a particular stock with respect to that of the market. Say the market, there is a market sentiment where, because of there is some economic decision which is taken by the government, because of which market has moved up by 1%. This particular stock of the company has moved up by 2%. Or else there is a negative sentiment which is prevailing in the market, because of which market has contracted by 1%. This company is contracting by 2-3%. This indicates that the security of the company is much more volatile than compared to the market, and hence if I invest in that kind of company, my returns will be subjected to much more volatility. I can either get lot of more return than anticipated return, or I may not even get any money at all. The entire money might have got wiped. So beta captures that additional risk, what additional movement in volatility of securities. We generally consider industry average betas to be representing the each for the respective company in the industry. So a sum of all these three things, the risk-free rate plus beta times the market risk premium, provides us with a general expected return on the cost of equity. And once we have arrived at the general cost of equity, there will be certain other differences in the companies due to the size and nature. Say there can be in the market, there can be few very startup companies, or can be companies which may have negative cash flows, or the companies which are well stable or providing regular dividends and all. So in order to capture this company specific risk factors, we add a certain percentage of premium to the cost of equity which is arrived which is called the company specific risk premium. Now the total of all these products will provide us with an approximate what is the cost of equity expectation of the investor. On the similar side, now if we go on to the cost of debt.
Surya, there are a couple of questions here. Maybe I'll take that questions and answer right here only. So one question is that now that there are no certainty in governments or banks itself, so how do we consider that as default risk? So certainly banks, the example what Surya gave is just as an indicator. Bank FDs or deposit rate should not be taken as a risk-free rate. What is, as Surya mentioned, 10-year government bond or something should be taken as a risk-free rate. However, even governments can default. As the question said, it is true that governments may also default. But what happens is in the local currency, government cannot default. That means if, say, for example, okay, let's take a realistic example of Venezuela. They are struggling so much, the government is not having any money at all. But still, there may not be any possibility of default from the government itself, but they can take a lot of other measures. For example, they'll start printing more notes. When they don't have money, they have the ultimate power to print the notes. They can print the notes, or they can take other deep measures such as increasing the taxes or levying new taxes, or anything can be done, but they will not default the repayment of deposits. So that is the reason it is taken as risk-free. And for the same reason, sometimes we also follow in such a way that if, for example, if I'm valuing a company which is located in a small country which is not too economically strong or visibility is not very good, then we will try to take the risk-free rate of, say, US and add a risk premium, to country-specific risk premium to that, and then arrive at a risk-free rate of that specific country, just to ensure that these government default situations will not come into place. Yeah, maybe Surya, we can move ahead to the next approach.
Yes. Now coming to the cost of debt. Chinmay, we are still discussing on cost of debt.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Now coming to the cost of debt, since we have figured out what is going to be the expected return on equity, return for the equity investors, on a similar way, the debt instrument holders also expect certain return from the company. This is also the cost of debt also is ascertained in a similar way, wherein we consider a risk-free rate and add a certain percentage of default risk premium, depending on what is the rating of the company, how is the company placing, and what is the credit history and all. And if the company has multiple debentures issued or multiple loans taken, we generally consider the average rate which is at which the company is able to borrow these funds. Now, another factor, important factor, which is to be considered while determining the cost of debt is the company would have savings in taxes in the in the form of interest expense. When the company pays interest on these debentures or in bank loans, the company would be able to save certain portion of tax which it would have otherwise been paid on its income. So the tax saving on account of tax shield on account of this interest has also to be factored in the cost of debt, and the net cost of debt for the company is to be considered for determining the cost of debt. Now, coming to the weighted average cost of capital, since we have figured out what is the cost of equity and what is the cost of debt, we need to average this both cost of equity and cost of debt to arrive at the weighted average cost of capital. And the one other important factor which is to be considered in the weights which are to be assigned to cost of equity and cost of debt should be based on market value weights and not based on book value weights. Yes, we can proceed to the next slide. Yeah, since we have seen what is income approach and what is the discount factor and how is the discount being done, let us now see what are the practical challenges which the valuers may face while valuing businesses. In the previous example which you have given, in case of a machinery, there is only one stream of cash flows which the machinery is expecting. However, but in the actual business scenario, there will be multiple streams of cash inflows and outflows. There can be different segments from which the company is earning revenues, and there can be different expenses to which the company has to pay. Like there can be an employee cost, there can be technology cost, or there can be traveling cost, or there can be purchase of raw materials. All these streams of cash flows, inflows and outflows have to be appropriately captured in your DCF calculation, and accordingly the value has to be added. And there can be now, since you have figured out what are all the cash inflows and outflows, now the problem could come as to how to estimate these revenues and expenses. Estimating a revenue and expenses could be challenging for most of the companies, particularly the young startup companies. So in order to estimate the revenues, maybe one approach which we can use is, if suppose the current market share of the company is say around 2% and it is expecting to achieve a market share of 30% over a period of next 5 years, we can estimate what is the year on year, what is the market share that it is going to capture, and based on the market share, what is the additional revenue inflow that the company is going to get. We can consider that revenue as a future projected revenue. And also in a similar way,
we are considering the time, maybe another 20-25 minutes are left. Maybe we'll move a little fast on detailed sections, and the main sections we can cover. So in this in this slide, once we have the projections as Surya was explaining, once projections are duly factored, ensuring that there are no negative cash flows and there are no other issues in the projections, then we will apply the cost of capital, what we discussed in the previous slide. Once we apply the cost of capital, we have the present value of the cash flows. And when we have the present value of the cash flows, the summation of all those present value of the cash flows will give the valuation for the company. And only one last adjustment to be done is that, see, generally in income approach, as Surya explained, the value comes from future cash flows by discounting it. But how long future can we estimate? For example, we can estimate 2 years, we can estimate 3, 5 years, maximum 10 years, we can estimate as to this could be my cash flows in the next 10 years. But what about after 10 years? So there is a very widely accepted formula for dividend discount model formula, which is available in Google. You can just type it and you'll get it. So we'll use that formula to determine what is the value of the company post such 10 years. For 10 years, we have the cash flows, which we will discount it to current value. And post 10 years, we have that formula. Through the formula, we'll determine the value and then determine the value of the entire company or entire asset which we are valuing at. So moving on to the next approaches, now we'll just draw a corollary between each of the approaches. So in the first approach, as Surya explained, it's an income approach where we'll see what is the cash flows in future and determine the value. In case of market approach, we'll see what could be the comparable assets value. For example, here also we're taking the same machinery example. In the first approach, when we see a machinery, we'll see what is the utility or future cash which I can generate from that machinery and then value the machinery. In this market approach, if I'm valuing a machinery, then I'll find, if say, for example, comparable another machinery is available, then if that value is available, for example, my competitor bought one machine from, say, Japan, imported a machine from Japan. Now I'm evaluating another machine, say from Europe, I'm buying a machine. So I need to know how much I can pay this European machine. So I'll see what my competitor paid who imported the first machinery and compare it. Say for example that other machinery was 5,000 ton capacity and my machinery is 2,000 ton capacity. Maybe I'll think, okay, should I pay at least half of it on a high level? I need not pay half, but on a high level, the valuation and the market approach will work like that. Just see another comparable company or comparable asset, see what is the value. So if the comparable company's value is there in the public domain, then this approach will work. So just moving over from this example of machinery, say I'm valuing a company whose comparable company is listed in the stock market. So I very easily have the price of the comparable company which is listed in the stock market. Then I will, from that listed company, then I will make some adjustments to my company. Somebody in the questions had mentioned about a 100-bed hospital we need to value, which I replied. So similarly, if for example I have a 100-bed hospital which I need to value, and there is a listed company which is there, which is say for example 5,000 bed hospital, then it is very difficult to compare and take that value, but still we can apply the method. If that 5,000 bed hospital is valued X, then 100 bed hospital is simple mathematics, so and so should be valued. Of course, we need to do a lot of discounting for the lack of governance which will be there between the companies and the scale. The benefits which you get from 5,000 bed hospital being in the scale and many aspects. So generally, it is not right to approach compare such a big difference companies. But if you have a comparable company which is in the same field, same space, and also in the same similar size, then such valuations can be taken. And also more so in the examples which we were discussing, say for example a startup, similar startup, if the valuation is available, somebody invested in that startup, then we have the valuation of that similar company, then we can try applying that valuation in this company. So this is all about market approach, where we'll try to compare between different things and then arrive at it. So here also similar example we have in the slide, like we explained for the beds. Even in the hotels also similarly valuation can be done. If a 250 bed room hotel is valued so and so, how do my target company valuation can be done. So this is all about market approach. Moving on to the last approach which Surya was covering, which is cost approach. In cost approach, again going back to the same example of machinery, if I need to value the machinery under cost approach, then I will see, okay, what is the machinery they are quoting? What is the alternative I have? Maybe I need to employ some 100 laborers to produce that much quantity of output. So my cost for that labor should be so and so. So what cost I can afford to pay to buy this machinery? Or looking in other words, say once I produce say some 100 products I can produce using this machinery, for how much I can sell and what is the margin I need to earn. Say if I can earn about 10 lakhs and I need to have at least some 20% margin, and 8 lakhs could be the total expense, and all other expenses is around say 3 lakhs, then maximum 5 lakhs I can afford to pay to this machinery. So this is at a high level, this is the way a cost approach works. Likewise, our idea was to compare between the same machinery example between all the three approaches. So in this way, the cost approach, the easier way to understand cost approach is whatever is to be spent is to be used as a value. This may look like it is not a right method. Most likely income approach and market approach may be better method, but actually in many cases cost approach would also be very good. For example, if we are valuing say an IP, so for that IP, we really cannot estimate with any realistic estimates. We cannot estimate any projections for that IP. If it is a very new and novel kind of a thing, which we cannot really make a projection, and there is no comparative at all to that IP, then possibly we'll try to see if a similar IP should be done. How much, say for example, how many man hours of engineers is required? What other tools required? If there is any advanced tools required to code that IP. So likewise, we'll go under cost approach to see what is the valuation of that IP. I'm not saying that all IP should be valued under cost approach. I'm just saying that many a times cost approach also could be practical. In those instances, income and market approach may not be possible. Also, another example which Surya was mentioning, if the company is in liquidation stage, then we may go under cost approach to value that rather than other income approach, which does not make practical sense for a company which is into liquidation. So these are the different, we discussed different approaches. Same company can be valued in different approaches also, as long as information is available. And otherwise, depending upon the situations and other things, we choose which approach to be followed. So now, after understanding the different ways of looking at the valuation and how an asset or a company to be valued, we have two more sections. Next one is regulatory requirements. So regulatory requirement is one of the key area which any finance person should know as to when all the regulations require valuation. So what we'll try to do is, anyway, as somebody was asking also, we'll share the presentation. So we'll not go into each and every detail of which regulation in what instance require valuation. I'll try to explain the context in which valuation is required in each of the regulations. First is Companies Act. So in a Companies Act, there are various transactions which needs valuation as per the Companies Act and the rules thereunder. So why valuation is required is the regulators here wants to protect the interest of the public at large, and also the interests of the minority shareholders and employees and all other stakeholders who are not a part of the decision making of the company. That means who are not a part of the board or not a part of the majority shareholding. So that is why, for example, if say, let us consider a simple example, one shareholder A who owns 75% of the stake in the company, and there are many other shareholders who owns a small 25% shareholding. So once the shareholder A owns 75%, they can pass the special resolution also in the way they want. Let's say if they approve a private placement offer to another person at a price which is much lesser than the price. So in which case others cannot object in a reasonable way because he holds the 75%. And once that major shareholder approves, everybody else, shares can be allotted under private placement. So in such cases, if such share allotment is done at a very low price, then there will be a dilution for other minority shareholders. So of course they have other reliefs, all other reliefs under the Companies Act may be possible, but why go to such other reliefs? So Companies Act had provided a mechanism to stop that action itself by way of seeking an independent valuation. That is the reason an independent valuer should value the company and then see to it that the price at which the board is allotting is not lesser than or is not unfavorable compared to whatever is provided by the independent valuer. So like this, there are various other provisions like buyback and other things where valuation is required under Companies Act, which is mentioned in these slides. So then next regulation is income tax. Even income tax the whole concept or logic of income tax valuation being prescribed in income tax is tax authorities want to protect their revenue and ensure that whatever transaction is done at a fair market price, or is done at an arm's length price, so that the adequate taxes are paid and it is not devalued or transaction not done in a different value or shown in a different value in such a way that taxes are less. So of course this is the intention. However, income tax act prescribes a specific way of doing the valuation. It doesn't leave it to the fair value of the chartered accountants or anybody who is valuing. It prescribes its own methodology in most situations that may or may not be fair, but we just need to go by whatever methodology prescribed by the income tax, and in the same methodology we need to value and then see whether the commercial transaction will lead to any tax consequence or not, based on whatever valuation we get based on methodology prescribed by the Act. But in some instances it does prescribe FMV, fair market value also. You may just go through in these slides. Then FEMA is another important regulation which require valuation. In FEMA, the objective or the consideration of the regulator is in such a way that the country is not losing out its currency benefit. That means whenever there is a cross-border transaction is happening, there should not be a resident should not pay too much money to a non-resident, or the non-resident should not pay very less to a resident. The objective of the law is not to protect the residents. The objective of the law is to protect the country's exchequer and country's forex and everything. So with this, it prescribes valuation requirements in some of the scenarios. So in those instances, we would need to do the valuation before proceeding to the transactions. Then there are some other requirements also apart from these important laws. One is stamp duty regulations. Whenever say a merger is happening or share allotment is happening, stamp duty to be paid. Wherever stamp duty is to be paid, it has to be paid on a fair market value. So for that purpose also valuation may be required, but most of the instances for the transaction, some other legislation should have already prescribed the valuation requirement. So the same thing can be adopted with stamp duty regulations, because stamp duty regulation doesn't prescribe any detailed legislation about how valuation to be done. So any fair market value, any arm's length valuation should work for stamp duty also. And then lastly, accounting related requirements also would be there for various disclosures, financial reporting, as I discussed in the beginning. For accounting purposes also, we need to do the valuation. So after understanding this, we have one last part of the session, which is very interesting part of the discussion. And also I saw already some questions in the Q&A relating to this. So how do we value companies during the COVID crisis? So I'll give you a little brief about what is the crisis, and then let us see how do we value. So this COVID became a world pandemic by when WHO declared in March. And then initially we thought that the crisis is only for China. We were seeing that in Wuhan, in some districts, there has been lockdowns. People are not being allowed to go outside India. We were thinking, how can people be prevented to go outside the home and all? But now we are seeing realistically wherever we are in the whole world, it's the same scenario. So initially we thought it's only China, but then we realized it's the global crisis. So entire global consumption as well as production, all cycles are affected. And more importantly, all the economies have paused with the lockdown. It's not exactly paused. Some economies somewhere here and there are functioning, but not routine, normal function is there. A lot of things have been paused. And every possible country has announced stimulus. This is a very, very important thing to consider, the stimulus, because it is from the valuation perspective, it'll impact in a lot many different ways. Just take an example of considering say cost of capital. So when we take cost of capital, should we take cost of capital pre-stimulus or post-stimulus? There can be huge differences because of stimulus package. And some of the sectors which got the stimulus package, you may need to consider less cost of capital because the risk may be less. So likewise, each and everything in the valuation would be affected by these economic measures. So as we have already, we know, I mean, the amount of impact, as in the right side it is mentioned, 44 lakh cases are there. There are lakhs of deaths which has already happened. So in this entire scenario, how do we do the valuation? So one important parameter to be considered is how the markets are reacting to this situation. In 2018 crisis, there was around at least 50 to 60% of dip was there in almost all the markets globally. But very interestingly, but rightfully, in this issue, the dip is only to the extent of 20 to 30%, and which is also to some extent it is recovered. Why this difference is, this is based on one of the basic concept of valuation also, which is whether whatever risk, the COVID risk, or if you take 2018 scenario, financial risk, whether it is diversifiable or not. See, what risk which we are facing today in COVID scenario is an undiversifiable risk. Because if we think that, say, India is risky, then even US is risky, Europe is risky, so we can't diversify that risk. If we think that technology is risky, then steel may also be risky, automobile is also risky, then it cannot be diversified. So in any way you look at it, this is not a diversifiable risk. So the thinking is, if at all somebody has to sell shares, say for example, if somebody has to sell shares in stock market, which happened in say 2008, there could be at least alternative places where I could put the money. If I sell shares, I can say buy gold. But that is also not a very risk-free. In these situations, who will be interested in buying gold? They will all want to save their money. So I remember in 2012, there was a movie also, and many people were thinking that world will end. So when such scenario comes where world may end, where do you put money? So if do you put in stock market? Definitely no. Do you put in gold? Definitely no. Why? I mean, when world is ending, when I don't have anything, why gold? I only need to put, say, money with Elon Musk, because I can go at least to a different planet when this earth is ending. So likewise, nowhere you can put the money. So there is no, I mean, there is nothing called there is an increased risk. because risk has increased everywhere. So there is nothing called increased risk. So if somebody wants to sell something and then prices decline, then there is no alternative. So better not sell it. Just continue with your holding. So this is one distinguishing factor which we need to consider compared to all other scenarios, whether it is 2008 financial crisis, 2000 dot-com burst, or even Great Depression or World War. All of that had some kind of limitations. Even the World War impact was more impactful in most of the countries and very, very less impactful in some countries. So still it was not a truly global impact, but this COVID situation is truly global impact. That is the reason this will shake all our fundamental assumptions of valuations also, and because of this reason it will be very, very difficult to say in a single line as to how valuation can be done. But in simple terms, how valuation to be done in COVID situation is very, very important aspects I'll discuss. One is just revisit the projections, what we have done, revisit the possibilities of the company. For example, one of our clients also, MyGate. Always MyGate, I used to see this as an apartment complex related facility company, but that is today working with our police department and providing passes for inter and inter-district movement during this COVID situation. So likewise, go see a company and see what exactly this COVID has impacted to them and how the future impact of that has changed. And accordingly, draw the projections, draw the financial modeling, go back to your drawing room, revisit the company, redo the things, and then see how valuation can be done. So broadly, we can categorize companies into three categories, which you would have seen in other places also. One category where COVID has impacted the companies in a very drastically negative category. For example, tourism, for example, restaurants, it is completely impacted in a negative way. There can be neutral impact, could be some of the healthcare, could be some of the educational related companies, maybe neutral or little positive or little negative. And there can be third scenario, which is deeply impacted, which is positively impacted, like the example of one of the companies I was giving. Similarly, also online tutoring, online gaming companies, they'll be positively impacted. So it is not that just because of the COVID, I will reduce valuations. We need to take a very measured call and bucket your company which you are valuing in three different buckets, and then see how exactly it has to be valued. So this is about COVID scenario. One of the question was also there. I was just reading the question. I think in one or the other way, the question is answered in the COVID explanation. So in this slide also, most points I already considered. Some of the things like as I mentioned here, work from home. Recently, we were talking about a very beautiful example. How do you value a real estate company? So when everybody is saying real estate is very difficult, there is no future and everything because everybody started work from home, no market space will be there. But yes, for example, if a company started working from home, maybe office space is a little less requirement, but however, your home should, if you have a 2 BHK, it should become 3 BHK, or at least a small other place should be there, or some new infrastructure should come. So definitely is because we will not. I mean, the entire world will not sit at home and do meditation, right? So irrespective of whatever situation, we will go out, we will do something, and when we do something, some value creation will happen. Irrespective of in whichever way, whatever we do, some value creation is there. COVID can do everything and anything to disrupt value, but anything and everything what we do will lead to some or the other value creation. So one way if it goes, other way it will come. So definitely there will not be any end to the economy or something, but we need to take a very much measured way. So that's why in my last point I mentioned, if you have money, hold on it, wait for it, do not take too quick decisions. And if you see, but at the same time, don't be too conservative. If you see an opportunity in your own spectrum, so if you are there in say steel, and if you see a very good opportunity in your steel, whatever you're doing, or a little bit extension of whatever you're doing, if there is an opportunity for little rejigging it or little changing it or anything is required, go ahead, and as long as you are clear about it, go ahead and do it. But don't invest or don't spend time or money or efforts at this juncture where there is no clarity. Just because something is undervalued, it may not be a right option to buy. It may further be undervalued. So this is the last closing remarks of us, that stay, whatever you have, hold on it. Don't take very, very quick decisions. Wait and take measured decisions. So we are exactly on time. Maybe 1 or 2 minutes I'll spend to see if there are some more questions, if we can answer. So one of the question is, should existing debt equity ratio to be used, or can we use ideal D ratio of 80-20 to compute WACC? So WACC to be computed always with futuristic, whatever is the company's expected debt equity ratio, that has to be used to compute WACC. Can you stress a little more on valuation approaches of startups? In the DCF is recommended approach for startups. Startups, we already discussed that how exactly startups will be generally valued. But however, if you are not a VC, if you are somebody who is practicing in startup valuation, most likely DCF could be the approach to go. Not always. It will have the optimal result, because you may not have some of the inputs, but amongst other methods, that is the more appropriate method. How do we value CCDs which are convertible based on future funding prices? So this is again very tricky issue where so generally CCDs are valued as equal to equity shares, but if their conversion is based on a future, then there are two approaches. One approach is if that, say for example, future event is after 3 years, if that 3 years is to be today, we need to make an assumption that if that 3 years were to be today, then how the shares could have been converted. If that can be determined, then it is in a simple way, as if it is valued today, we need to do. But if that is not possible, if that assumption cannot be made, then we need to really do an option pricing model where after 3 years, if these are the different scenarios, if it can happen, what could be the valuation and what is the present value of that. So that's the way CCDs with future convertibility can be done. Please share the presentation. Yes, we would definitely share. What can be the possible impact of valuation in COVID? We already discussed. Could you please show some light on the risk premium of COVID? So there is, so again, as I told, risk premium specifically for COVID is not the right way to look at it. You need to distribute your companies into 3 different buckets. And if your company is in the risk, then add risk premium. Otherwise, don't add risk premium. Next is, valuations are based on certain assumptions, and those assumptions are subject to change most of the times. How to address it? So it's a good question, but valuation, definitely it is, assumptions are tend to change, but whatever assumptions which we are making, if they are closer to closer to being realistic as on the date of valuation, then we should just go ahead with it. Of course, it can change. What we estimated may be more or maybe less, but what is expected to be right in the future, that has to be considered on the valuation date, and just move on. Impact of COVID-19 factored on valuation, we already discussed. So there are a few more questions. Possibly we have already overshot by 2-3 minutes. Maybe these questions we will try to answer again separately. And yeah, I'll just see the chats also if something is there. Okay, nothing much. So thank you very much for your all patient hearing from my side and Guru and Surya's side. We really enjoyed doing this thing, coverage of broader aspects and then different approaches, and then addressing a lot of questions. As discussed and answered in the chats, we will share the presentation. We will also share the recording, and also some